Ahoy! It's your buddy Hambone here to chat you up about 5B, the 5E-BX hybrid from Dank Dungeons. You heard me right, I said 5B, which gives you a killer way to get OSR gameplay in a 5th edition compatible package. 5B is based on concepts by Harold Masson and developed by Lex Mandrake, creator of such best-selling works as Joy of Monster Cooking and Azag, and boils down the current rule set for quick and easy play by simplifying characters, monsters, and more. It also adds the familiar mechanics and procedures of basic and expert, such as XP for gold and encounter tables, all while being presented in slim versions of the standard 3-volume D&D format. But wait, that's not all. 5e also takes notes from story games with flexible character powers such as on-the-fly spell effects for easy casting, giving players more room to be creative. At the same time, game masters also get solid guidelines to referee fairly. And for those new to RPGs, 5B is chock full of examples of play for every rule concept presented, so you'll always know what's what. So if you want to run modern adventures in the OSR, look no further. Get 5B now from Dank Dungeons on Drive-Thru RPG.
Hey, Warlock Rock, give me a word.
Let's go with coffee.
Dragon Warrior, can you give me a word?
Everyday Tiger Wizard, let's go with Bog Witch.
Awesome, let's make the swamp hut of the caffeinated Bog Witch together.
What's gonna happen in this swamp?
Well, obviously trouble is brewing a latte.
Do you love game design and seeing the guts of how RPG adventures are made? Listen to the Epic Levels Mad Dungeon podcast, where guests from the world of role-playing games join us to create original and super fun content for your table.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He said, hey, Hambone, did you know that you were born on the same day as the famous actor whose son played the Wolfman? Stu Horvath.
Wait, really?
So, my birthday, April 1st, is the same birthday as Lon Chaney. His son played the Wolfman, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got so excited when I was like, because when you have a birthday and it is known, stuff comes up on the internet like, oh, born on this day was Lon Chaney. I was like, yes, born on the same day as Wolfman. I was like, oh, it's Wolfman's dad. Still cool, but it's fine. Could have been cooler, but it's fine. So, Stu, on the subject of werewolves, what are we talking about today?
I wanted to swerve this week and talk about Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King, a little-known horror writer.
Yeah, he's done a couple things you may have heard of.
Yeah, so Cycle of the Werewolf, I'm a little hard-pressed. Stephen King, if you take his entire writing career that I've, interacted with and read and thought about and watched the movies and stuff, I feel like my main takeaway is he's all right.
That's a hot take, man.
I enjoy reading his books and there's good ones, but I don't know. I understand why people really like his stuff, but I really enjoyed The Outsider. I like The Outsider adaptation on HBO. I never quite understood the appeal of The Stand, despite the Bernie Wrightson illustrations. I do love Jerusalem's Lot. I love that short story. I like his short stuff better than his long stuff. And I like his early stuff better than his later stuff, generally.
You mean the stuff he wrote when he was living off of nothing but cocaine?
I mean, I think that it is an incredibly interesting book. There's a lot of good horror in there. There's also a lot of really terrible stuff in there. And it's like a gigantic book that kind of hangs together pretty all right. But I don't know. Stephen King, he's fine. For me, it's a toss-up between Salem's Lot and Cycle of the Werewolf for my personal favorite.
Those are my favorites too.
Yeah, and for good reason. Two classic monsters given the Stephen King treatment. The vampire and the werewolf. I distinctly remember getting Cycle of the Werewolf at the Walden Books in Willowbrook Mall.
Whoa.
Sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. And for whatever reason, we left the mall, and I don't know if my mom had to or dad had to go to that other annex mall or something, but I wound up sitting in a parking lot with that book for a long time. And I basically read the bulk of the book in the parking lot after having just bought it while waiting for us to like go to the next place. It is an immediately gripping book. I loved it. And, for no small reason, because of the fantastic Bernie Wrightson illustrations. But that edition is the edition that most people have interacted with, which is the paperback that is, digest sized.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of his shorter books too, like by and large.
Yeah, it like barely counts as a novella.
For Stephen King, yeah. Like Stephen King, like a short story for Stephen King is like, it was only like 150 pages.
Well, do you know what the original pitch for this book was?
No, what?
The guy who wound up printing the original edition of the book had approached Stephen King at a horror convention and was like, let's do a werewolf calendar. I'll get Bernie Wrightson on board. He'll do the pictures, and you could do like a cool little like short like blurb every month to kind of string the story together.
And does Stephen King look at him and go, hey, man, no snow, no show?
No, I think that he was just like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting idea. Like, we could do this. Like, let's work with it. And then, of course, like he sits down to work on the thing. And because he's Stephen King, he can't limit himself to like 2 paragraphs per month. And it turns into a novella. Like, we should be lucky that it's that short.
Like, all kidding aside, like Stephen King has been very open about how he's like, I don't remember this book. I wrote it on cocaine. And I always thought that was like kind of funny. However, like if you talk to anybody who writes, it's always a thing where if you got it, you got to write it, and he is, to me, one of like the truest illustrations of that, where, he would not have like this massive collection of books. Like, I don't even know how many books he wrote. Like, people are like, oh my God, did you read this Stephen King book? I'm like, when the hell did that come out? And they're like, well, in between this and the 9 other books he released during this time period. Like, prolific, I don't even think begins to describe Stephen King. I get it, though. It's amazing. It's unreal. Like, unreal. Like, I want to say like him and like Diane Steele, probably like the 2 most prolific writers of like the last 2 generations. But I get it. And, when you got that fire, like, I read this little blurb about this werewolf, and you're like, but, I could also write this. And you're like, like, it just escalates. It is an escalation, and it's a fire that gets out of control way too quickly. It's like, oh, wow, I had a cigarette that I didn't put out right, but I work in a toilet paper factory. Who knew? Like, that is what I imagine, like, Stephen King's writing process to be.
It boggles my mind. I like to look back at like bands and this seems to be like a thing that happened with bands in the 70s mainly, at least as far as I've noticed, where like the first couple albums are actually released the same year. Cheap Trick did this.
Yeah.
Iron Maiden almost did that. Like the idea of, and those first 2 Cheap Trick albums are full of bangers. They are like
masterpieces,
absolute classic albums. And like the fact that like they managed to get two of them out in the same year and then do the Live at Budokan record like the next year is like insane. And Stephen King is the same thing, and he's also a product of the 70s. There's something in the water about the 70s. Like how do you put out 2 600-page novels in the same year?
Cocaine.
Yeah, I mean, but no, I mean he does that now sober.
No, I know, I know. Well, what the thing is with the music thing, like especially in like the 70s and the 80s, like you'd get back-to-back albums by a lot of different artists because, what people who might not really be engrossed in the music industry understand is like, you're not like, oh, we just started a band and now we got a record deal and now like we're off to the races. Like mostly, and it's obviously very different now in the TikTok era, but mostly like, back then, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, like you've been grinding sometimes for a decade and you've got like a decade's worth of material just kind of kicking around. You make that first album like, oh my God, we need a second album. How fast can you do it? It's like, well, we wrote that 7 years ago. Here you go. And then sometimes you get to that third album and you are on a touring cycle and it's hard to kind of work and write those songs, the new songs as you're going because it's, the band's a hit now. Now I got to do like a 2-year tour and it takes longer for stuff to come out.
Yeah.
Whereas like, those Cheap Trick records, I mean, I forget the year that they got together, but they were just doing gig after gig after gig. And fun fact, back then, the clubs that they were playing, everything was backline. So before they were like a band that needed like a trailer and a crew, like they just threw everything in the back of a Cadillac and they drove to the gigs together in a Cadillac with the only things that they needed to play the gig, plug and play. Amazing. But I digress. The Stephen King thing, it's like, even if he has to do a book tour, he can still just kick it in his hotel room at night and write. Like,
Yeah.
it's a very different kind of experience, I think, when, you are a writer of books versus a writer of songs who plays in an active band. Like, I'm Googling right now. I'm going to come back to it, see how many novels he's actually written in the time he's been writing. And also remember, he wrote a bunch of shit under a pen name too. So like,
Yeah.
he had like
Bachman
double the
books,
books
yeah.
coming out at once, man. Jesus, go on.
Yeah. So I just loved Cycle of the Werewolf. The conceit is that growing out of the calendar idea is that each chapter is a month of the year, and a werewolf has come to the town of Tarker Mills, which is, of course, is in Maine. They play a little loose with the actual calendar and the lunar cycle. So that ensures that you get the February chapter takes place on Valentine's Day, because of course, and then, but you also get July 4th, Independence Day. So you get the holidays. So like you get the feel, and that's important to the book, making it, if you just had like 3 winter chapters in a row, it wouldn't work. You need to have like the Lonely Heart Lady get eaten on Valentine's Day, and then like the story starts to vibrate, right? It is a little overwritten, I think. I just reread it. The first couple chapters are a little bit they feel just a little bit like a writing assignment, which it kind of was in like a creative writing class in college. Like they're a little too neat and they don't hook into the larger narrative. Once it gets going with the larger narrative, it gallops and is fantastic. And it does a really good job of the plot of the book is sort of in the background, whereas like the experience is town being assailed over and over and over again by what is, pretty obvious. I mean, the prose is pretty direct with the reader. They're like, it's a werewolf, but like the town doesn't know that. There's just this nice feeling of growing fear in the town, and how are they going to deal with it? There's the chapter when it can't get any people, so it eats a whole bunch of pigs, and the farmers get pissed. And then like the one farmer is just like, I think we got a werewolf. And you're like, all right, well, we're going hunting. And it feels really good and like exciting, like a good werewolf movie. But like, that's the foreground stuff. The background stuff is the actual plot, in which the one kid kind of encounters the werewolf on the 4th of July. And over the course of the subsequent months, figures out who the person in town is, the werewolf. And then the climax is in December, when the werewolf is dealt with a silver bullet, which is what they named the film adaptation, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's wild. It is. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It does feel like, and I generally think, and listen, I'm not the most well-read Stephen King guy. I'll be 100% transparent with that. Like, I've only really inquired into the hits because, again, he's written so many books. Like, it's funny because I Googled it, as I said I was going to do. And when you Google, and you know how like when you Google some stuff, sometimes it'll kind of complete the thought for you and just kind of tell you the quick answer to what you want it to be. And I said, how many books has Stephen King? And it said at least 76. And I was like,
it's insane.
Sweet Jesus. And then, like, if you go to Wikipedia, it says, well, like 65, but then like some nonfiction books on top of that. But like, when you think that his first book came out in 1974, so just say that the at least 76 is accurate, right? We'll call it 75. Imagine writing 75 books, the length of the books that Stephen King writes. Granted, his novellas are only 150 pages, but like 75 books over 49 years.
That's impossible. I have just such a hard, as somebody who writes and actually writes fairly fast, I still just can't believe that. It's just so, oh my God.
No, like, you think about that. Like, he doesn't use ghostwriters. He literally he goes in, he bangs it out himself. Like, first off, granted, and again, I'm a guy who writes too, but like, I write tabletop RPGs. So yes, there is story, and yes, my book may be like 100 pages, but there's also like weapons descriptions and like, direction on how combats are supposed to go and pictures. Like, he's not writing books with a lot of pictures in them, if any.
Usually.
Yeah, Cycle of the Werewolf withstanding, but like, when you think about that, so not only over the course of like 49 years, 75, 76 books, 65 to 70 something books, whatever it actually is, who knows, you know, just like how many licks it takes to get the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop. You may never know, but you're not just talking about like a short story here. You're talking about like, he has to come up with multiple characters, a setting, lore. He's got to come up with interpersonal relationships between these characters, a greater overarching narrative that ties them all together, a villain that you could sink your teeth into, motivation for the villain, what that villain is doing in the background while everyone else is trying to get their shit together. He does multiple books, like a year to have to reach this point. And you're like sitting there going like, that's a lot of work baseline to do like one. If you could bang out one book a year, most people can't even do a book his length in a year. He's something else, man. He's like, you know, I think that calling him a genius would be a disservice. Like, I don't think there's a word to really describe like what Stephen King is as a creator, much less a writer. You know, my mind is like,
a couple people in the Discord collect King, and one person was just like, I get them in the thrift stores when I see one, you know, a hardcover first edition, and then they shared a picture like they're really like struggling shelves, and it was just like a 2-shelf kind of thing, and but like they were jammed on there, and there's just giant books, and it, like a whole bunch of Stephen King books always looks like it overstuffs a shelf even if they fit perfectly. But then the other guy was just like, oh yeah, my wife buys them, and like we have almost all of them, and he showed us the picture of this closet just jammed, and it looked dangerous.
oh yeah.
They're so big and there's so many of them.
I mean, the only reason why you ever see his books in thrift shops are not because they're not good. It's because like people like see this book, it's like, oh, I'm going to read this Stephen King book. And the book is like 700 pages, whatever. You know, the stand was like, what, 1,000 something pages?
Yeah.
And like, you have the intention of reading this book and you start reading the book and you're like, I don't have it in me to read this like 700 page book. You know, it doesn't go as fast as the movie does. Because, you know, a lot of people who come to Stephen King because having written so many books, there are so many cinematic adaptations, whether it be like on television, whether it be in actual movies, like, and they don't play out often, you know, as 1-for-1 or even like close to 1-for-1 of what you get in the books, because they have to cram all of that shit in like a 2-hour movie. And there is so much like depth and nuance to all the stuff he's writing in these books. So like you're never going to get it all. Like people, you know, often would complain about like, you know, oh, but they didn't do this in that Harry Potter movie. It's like, well, try adapting Stephen King. Okay. Yeah. Good luck, you know?
And most of those movies aren't very good, really.
No. No, it's rare that you do get a good cinematic adaptation of a Stephen King property.
Yeah, I think The Outsider on HBO is probably like the high watermark for me. I think that worked really well and stayed as true to the novel as you could really have expected, and it had some really nice performances.
Yeah, I mean, like, granted, like, you know, The Shining veers away from the novel in several different ways, but like it was Kubrick.
Yeah, a great
you
movie,
know, like,
bad Stephen King adaptation.
Bad Stephen
right?
King adaptation. And I think that's the rub. Like, you either have to decide to make that great movie based off of this material, or you adapt the material. I don't think there's really a good half measure there. Like, I think Salem's Lot with David Soul was a great version of that story. And again, it's been so many years since I've read Salem's Lot, but I feel like it was like close enough for rock and roll, you know?
Yeah. And like Salem's Lot is a weird book. I love that book, but it doesn't have an ending. It doesn't end in anything approaching satisfying. So like adapting that for screen is going to be extra challenging.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm trying to think of which other ones, like, you know, I remember that like they did The Shining again on ABC. And they had, what was it, Steven Weber from Wings?
From Wings, yeah.
Yeah, playing the Jack Nicholson role. But, like, you know, in the book, it's a hammer like a mallet that's being used and not like an axe. You know, and I think Stephen King, if I remember correctly, was like heavily involved in it because he was like trying to help them make an accurate adaptation of The Shining. Did you get like stuff like, you know, Maximum Overdrive?
Oh, God, yeah.
You know, it's just...
Love that movie, but that's not a good movie.
No, and it's crazy, but like there's so much stuff out there that you find out like after that, it's like, oh, that was based off a Stephen King thing. It's like because he's written so much, a glut.
I was a little surprised that Silver Bullet is a Stephen King movie. Like it took a long time for those facts to kind of coalesce for me, and I think that Silver Bullet is sort of like the best of the bad, like not like what I would say is a conventionally good movie, but I'm thoroughly entertained every time I watch it.
Oh, I love it.
I will rewatch Silver Bullet fairly regularly. I think that it is some prime 80s horror fare.
I think I watch it once a year, to be quite honest with you. It's funny because when I was younger and I saw it, once I got over like my fear of horror movies, I had no idea that it like literally took me years. Like I didn't realize it was like a Stephen King adaptation probably until I was like 20, 21, because it was called Silver Bullet.
Yeah. And the plot is the same, like I said, but like you lose a lot of the cycle of the werewolf this in the translation. Like you don't get that nice month to month vignetting that you get in the novel.
It's kind of interesting to me because, the more we talk about it and the more I've seen it, I don't know if you've ever read Batman the Long Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting kind of parallel in the way that the story is told between like Batman the Long Halloween and, Cycle of the Werewolf, because it's specific things that unfold over a certain period of time in certain months that have to deal thematically with those months. It's interesting. To me, it's a very interesting way to tell a story. And yet at the same time, how do you cram like 12 months of this story into a 2-hour movie?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't even know if it was a 2-hour movie off the top of my head.
I would bet that that's an 88-minute 80s,
It is actually it's an hour 35 minutes.
Wow. All right. It ticked over the 90-minute mark.
And that's it, folks. Little PSA. Your old buddy Hambone here thinks the perfect length of a movie is between 88 and 92 minutes. If you go over that, you got too much story and you need to trim it down.
I am 100% with you.
Like, the more I watch it, and listen, I love all the Marvel movies, but there's a certain point where I was like, okay, Avengers Endgame, I can understand why it's a 3-hour movie. This is the culmination of like the 30-something movies that came before it. So this is the big finish. You need 3 hours. I get it. But nowadays, man, a little sidebar here. Whenever I watch a movie and I'm looking at the time to watch the movie and I see 2 hours or 2 hours plus, I'm like, I don't know if I have this in me. Even watching it at home, because it's like, you always hit that point where, again, I'm not a film director, but I am a connoisseur of television and movies. I've watched a whole lot of it. And I'll tell you, there's always like 15, 20 minutes you can cut and get it down to something a little more palatable. And the thing is, like, even with the 2-hour runtimes or whatever, like, they always have those plot holes. And you're just like, man, you could probably like trim that down and then you don't have to worry about filling that plot hole. It just kind of comes out in the wash. But yeah, man, 88 to 92 minutes. It's all the movie I need.
Yeah.
I digress.
So Silver Bullet, I found out a little bit of a fun fact. I don't want to get too much into the movie, but I learned that it had a little bit of a difficult production. There was differences of opinion about how to treat the werewolf. King wanted the werewolf to be not a hulking beast, not with a lot of character. He wanted it to be very neutral and animalistic, and the producer was like, no, we need like a giant hulking monster. So that was like a battle that raged back and forth for a long time during the film's production. And so while that was going on, the director was directing the scenes that didn't involve the werewolf, and then he finished those scenes and was sort of waiting around, and eventually was just like, you know what, you're gonna have to find somebody else to finish the movie once you figure out what you want to do with the werewolf costume, because I got other things I got to do. And that original director, before Dan Attias finished the movie, was Don Coscarelli of Phantasm fame.
What?
Right? And
oh my God,
it makes sense. Like, it feels like I never realized it until I saw the name, but like, it feels like his kind of work. Totally.
So yeah, like Phantasm is my favorite horror movie. I have, spear on my arm, the whole nine. Like, I'm watching in my brain the shots of Mike riding his bike around in Phantasm. And now I'm flipping it in reverse. I'm flipping it to the inverse, and I'm watching Corey on the motorcycle. it's the same shot. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Whoa.
And a lot of the small town treatment, the quirky characters, like I feel like the Gary Busey-ness was very much like a product of Casarelli's vision more than anything else. Like he feels like a phantasm character. Like he's hanging out with what's his name, the ice cream guy, you know?
Yeah, Hannah Reggie. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, and granted, like, by and large, that's 90% of the movie. Like, yeah, it's a werewolf movie, but like when you consider the amount of time that the werewolf is actually on screen doing shit, Don Coscarelli, he directed 90% of the movie.
Yeah.
More.
I mean, I'm excited to watch this movie again, to kind of stopwatch that and see just how much of this is Coscarelli.
Holy shit. Wow, Stu, I don't know how I'm gonna go about my Tuesday now. That's like,
It's hard. Like I want to watch it again, like right now.
right now. Damn. So, I mean, we've been at this for a while. We've been bullshitting about like Stephen King and all this other stuff. Well, we got to talk about Bernie Wrightson, I think.
Yes. So the reason why Cycle of the Werewolf is on my mind is there's this really big rummage sale out in the western New Jersey. It's for the Visiting Nurses Society or Association, and they it's like for charity. It help people out there donate lots of stuff. It's massive. And I love going to the book tent. I've gotten like piles and piles of like vintage sci-fi and fantasy paperbacks there. This time, back in the beginning of May, go out there, check out the sci-fi books. There's nothing there for me. It's all relatively new stuff, and I'm just like not interested. So I'm like popping around, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to leave the book tent. As I'm leaving the book tent in the section where they're just like, these are the books that are rare. $1 a paperback is like kind of what I pay. So like the rare stuff, I've just never really paid attention. But I see this thing, and it's just like, it's the big one. It's the Cycle of the Werewolf. It's the first printing in the orange jacket, and it's a role-playing game book sized.
Perfect.
And I was just like, oh my, that is a legitimately rare book. Like,
Yeah.
like I've looked at that and been like, oh man, I kind of want that, but I'm just like, I ain't paying $750 for that. It was like, $150, but like, all right, I'll take that action. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the main reason why I'm so psyched on this is because, as I said at the beginning, the paperback is digest sized, and it shrinks that beautiful Bernie Wrightson art. This is much bigger, so you get the full effect of the art, and it's fantastic. It's a mix of black and white and color. It is some of Bernie's finest work. It's up there with his Frankenstein. It is a creature defining portrayal of the werewolf. I think it looks so good and is uniquely Bernie's, and just like the detail of the line work and the way he handles the color, and it's a fantastic body of illustration.
I mean, I don't know what we could really say about Bernie Wrightson that his pictures don't already speak 1,000 words about. It's one I always say I don't regret anything, but there's always that moment where I was like younger and I was at a horror convention, and there he was like signing stuff, and I just couldn't afford anything. So I didn't want to go up and bother him, because I was like, I can't buy anything. I'm not going to bother the guy. And I'm like, fudge, I should have bothered the guy, because like, as far as artists go, and as far as artists and the genres that I love, like, he's Mount Rushmore level style of artist for things like horror and things like spooky and eerie type stuff. I highly recommend that if you don't read the book, obviously, like, sometimes you just don't have it in you to read a book, even though it's only 150 pages, because it's one of Stephen King's short stories, air quotes, short stories. I highly just Google Bernie Wrightson Cycle of the Werewolf. Like, please take a minute and just enjoy the artwork, because it's one of those things that at the very least will spark your imagination and make you feel good about monsters, because the artwork is second to none. It truly is. And I don't even think that Google will do a good enough job with it, but like, you'll see it and you're like, yeah, that's fucking cool.
Yeah, I don't think that even the soft cover is in print currently, but worth tracking down, seeing them in print rather than digital. My favorite is towards the end. I think it's November, when the crummy librarian gets it. He actually he leaves town to carouse, thinking that like that'll be his way of escaping the werewolf this month. But then the werewolf is also abroad, and it gets him on top of the cab of an 18-wheeler, and it's just there's a snowstorm, and it's great. And then there's like a spot illustration of the guy's head under the wheel of the truck. It's just fantastically gory without being like over the top. I do want to add that I had the distinct pleasure of pestering Bernie Wrightson twice while he was still alive. Once was at Chiller, and he was so nice. I bought a print. I have a signed print somewhere. And he signed my Captain Stern comics.
Wow.
Yeah, he was super nice. Just like very chill dude. And then when I was working at the Daily News, when Dark Horse reissued the Frankenstein book, I got to interview him. I'm not sure if the piece ever ran. And this sounds like a dig, but he was it isn't. This is actually like with great fondness. He was sort of a terrible interview because like he was so like humble about his work that I couldn't get a lot of good quotes out of him. He was just so chill and nice, and like talked about his process and stuff, but like was just very much like not having it when I was just like, this is one of the most important pieces of horror illustration. And he's just like, no, it was just something I did, like really very, very humble. I think about that a lot, especially every time I look at that Frankenstein book, because it really is one of the most important pieces of horror illustration, I think. But he was just very he didn't make a big deal about himself. That's always a nice thing to encounter in somebody who is massively talented.
It really is true. I mean, if you're looking for it, you could find copies of the book, paperback editions, for not that expensive. I know in 2016, I'm looking it up now, there was a Kickstarter for Cycle of the Werewolf limited edition portfolio. Currently, you could find it for about $350 on eBay. But when it came out, like, it's crazy because it was 2016. You could have gotten, the print box, a box with just all the prints in it from Cycle of the Werewolf. It was like $175, right? Could have gotten a calendar with the stuff on it as it was intended. They had a deluxe wood box artist edition set for $800. You get it in a wood box, and it comes with a silver bullet. That's inert, but like, it has the Bernie Wrightson W on it, and I'm like, that is pretty funny, man. And
that's pretty great.
And I think the wood box one would also come with like an original sketch from like 19. I would have bought it back then. I would have spent the money. 2016, I was actually kind of flush for cash, so that's something I definitely would have bought. And never regret. But yeah, man, meet your heroes, say hi. It'll be cool. So, do you have any final thoughts on Cycle of the Werewolf?
I do. Apparently, Stephen King said that, to his knowledge, it's the only horror novel that started as a calendar that got adapted to a film. So, like to his knowledge, the only horror movie calendar adaptation in existence, which I think is a funny little factoid.
That's a great little facts. Well, folks, this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Where can the people find you on the internets?
They can find me on the old Instagram at Vintage RPG. I think that I'm going to have to rearrange my October posts to make sure that I can get the first edition of Cycle of the Werewolf up there, because it is so pretty. It looks so 80s with its orange cover. I love it.
I think whatever you got in there, something's worth bumping for Cycle of the Werewolf.
Yeah.
You can find me across the internet, John McGuire RPG, on the Twitter, on the TikTok, on the Instagram, on the Substack. I'm trying to write like once a week, but I'm deep in actually writing my own shit. If you want to check out anything from 321 Action, books are available over on Drive-Thru RPG in PDF form, or you get the PDF and the book over at Exalted Funeral. You were going to shop there anyway, so go there and please buy my books. If you like the podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. We've been seeing more reviews. I've been seeing an uptick in numbers, and we appreciate that, because can't say enough how much it means to us that each and every one of you take a little time in your Mondays and listen to the show. That's why we keep making them. That's why we are coming up on our 5th anniversary on July the 7th, which is crazy when you think about it. It's definitely funny too, because like we've been doing this for so long. I didn't think we were doing it this long. I didn't think we actually did a lot of episodes, to me personally. But the next thing we're hundreds of episodes in 5 years. So yeah,
last week's episode was 220.
There you go. That's
a lot of episodes.
bonkers to me. And the only reason it's not more is because when we started, we were doing it bi-weekly. So
yeah,
we're happy to do it weekly for you. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you love the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, which is called
Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a guide to tabletop role-playing games from D&D to Mothership.
We got a behind-the-scenes look at 3-2-1 Action, my RPG, and some of the stuff I'm doing with that. We have a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of, and at certain tiers, we'll actually run games for the patrons. By the time this episode airs, I will have run the first game for our patrons of Call of Cthulhu, so I'm pretty psyched about that. Stu's running West Marches, which
we've done 4 sessions so far. I think the 5th is tonight, maybe. And like we just keep packing them in, and it's been a lot of fun. It's I maybe shouldn't say this, but I am surprised at how well it's working out.
Yeah, knock on wood, keeps being fun. We also have early release episodes at some point on Friday. You get the episode before everyone else gets it on Monday. And we're happy to be putting these out. So thank you again so much for listening. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.